Welcome to Thriller Talk. Today we have Rick BLEIWEISS starting his career in music as a rock performer, a producer of over 50 records, a songwriter, and record company executive. And now he worked with Clive Davis, Melissa Etheridge, the Backstreet Boys, Kiss, U2, Whitney Houston, the Bee Gees, and other industry legends. Since becoming a publishing company executive in 2006, he has acquired works by best-selling and award-winning authors such as James Clavell, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Rex Pickett, Leon Uris, and Nicholas Sansbury Smith, among many others. In his latest creative endeavor, Rick has written the Pignon Scorpion Historical Mystery Series, blending his love of the past with the twisty deliciousness of a whodunit. Rick, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Thank you. Very glad to be here. Thank you.
We're absolutely delighted, and we can't wait to dive into this. So first of all, congrats on your debut mystery. This is an exciting time for you.
It certainly is. I've had some excitement in my life with records I've produced that became hits and things like that, but this is a whole nother level for me, and I'm enjoying the heck out of it.
I'm so thrilled to hear that, and you should be very proud. So Pignon Scorpion, and we talked about this briefly before we started, you can say it the French way or the anglicized way. It's a really intriguing and unusual name. Now, there has to be a story behind this name. Can you share it with us?
I can. When I started out conceiving doing this, I realized that I wanted to create a character that would have a name that people might remember, that would be different than John Smith or Bob Jones or something like that. And, the kind of the role models that I used were Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes, neither of which are exactly day-to-day names, if you will. So the first thing I started doing, the first thing I actually did was postulated, and it's in the book, what his heritage was. And I decided that he would have an Egyptian father and a Haitian mother. And their stories are detailed in the book. So that what I did was I went out and I started researching. I do a lot of research. I'm a very good researcher. It's just, different people do different things good. I do research well. And I started researching Egyptian and Arabic names, last names, family names. And I looked at a number of them and they were kind of okay. And then I came upon Scorpion. And I liked two things about it. I liked the fact that it was very similar to Scorpion. So it was familiar but different. And I also liked what it stood for because it stands for adventurousness, entrepreneurship, intelligence. It just kind of fit the character and his father. So then, how did I come up with Pignon? I have his father in the book. I'm not going to give away too much of the book, but I have his father traveling to Haiti and meeting his mother there. And his mother lived in a valley at the base of a mountain, and the mountain and the valley were named after the French explorer who founded the region, and his name was Pignon. And I just thought that would be a cool way, and I liked the way Pignon and Scorpion worked together. And so that's how he became Pignon Scorpion.
That's a great history. I love that. And I love how names are meaningful, that they actually, like you said, the cultural backgrounds and the implications and the air of mystery in that name as well.
Yeah, well, like I said, I did a lot of research and I wanted to make sure that the book was historically accurate. So, I mean, I know more about Haiti than I ever knew before I started writing this book, among many other things.
Well, Rick, I mean, in your intro, Kim talked about your background a little bit. You had a really successful career in music. So I'm curious, like, when did you know that you wanted to write novels and what made you finally take the plunge?
I've written most of my life. I wrote the very first thing that I wrote. I think I was 8 or 9, and I wrote a sports newspaper with 3 carbon copies that I sold to my neighbors. Then I've written chapters in anthologies, mostly nonfiction anthologies. I've written newspaper columns, magazine articles and columns. And so I've always had an affinity to writing. And then when I moved to Ashland, where I live in Oregon from New York City, uh, I kept writing. I didn't start writing, I kept writing, but I wasn't doing novels. And then I joined a writers group. My next door neighbor was in a local writers collective, and they invited me to join them, and I did. And they were mostly all writing novels. So I said, well, let me take a shot at a novel. So the first thing that I started writing was actually, the first thing I started writing was a magical realism road trip novel. I finished that and showed it to agents, and it went nowhere. And then I wrote a sci-fi novel, showed that to agents, and it went nowhere. And then I started writing short stories featuring this character, Pinion Scorpion. And I wrote the first 1.5, and the writing group said, this is too good. This has got to be a novel, not short stories. Go to work on it. And so I went to work on it, and that's how the novel evolved out of that first short story. And this I sold to an agent. So, the rest is history.
Well, it's obviously your calling. I think that's fantastic. We talked briefly that about your dive into Haiti and your research. But were you intimately familiar with the historical period that you use in the mystery, or did you have to do a lot of research on that? And if you did, what is one interesting thing that you learned during that process?
I was not very familiar with that period of history, nor the environment in the countryside of England. I mean, I've been to England many times in my life, but I've never lived there. So I had a leg up on someone that's never been there, but I really, and I certainly was not alive in 1910, nor a scholar of the period. Um, so what I did was, but I want to preface it by saying, what I wanted to do was create a universe, a reality, where Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot actually existed, and that Scorpion, if you will, was the third leg on of the stool, of a three-legged stool in a way. So I had to set it in that time period because Holmes had died just before then. Poirot was just coming into prominence in that early 1900s era. John Watson was supposedly still alive. So I kind of was locked into there if I wanted him to have interplay with those other and reference them as contemporaries. So I went about doing tons and tons and tons of research into England in the early 1900s. And I learned more than I could possibly say. It would take 5 hours to 10 hours just to go through it. But I mean, I learned things like that in the year 1910, the book starts in June of 1910, and in May of 1910, England got a new king. So that's one of the things that I learned. I have to say, I'm almost finished writing the second book. So a lot of the research that I've done is kind of gone over into both books, if you will. And like one of the things I learned was that women, I actually have it written down here, that women started going to college in the United Kingdom in 1878. Because I have a woman in the second book, she's in the first, but she deals with that. But that Oxford and Cambridge were the universities that resisted having women as scholars. I learned a ton of terms, the gobby and wanker and, terms we don't use in the US and may not be used today in Britain, but they were certainly used in that era. And so I also, I'll tell you another thing I learned, but it had nothing to do with that. There's a scene in the book that takes place in the American Old West in the 1850s, mid 1800s. And there's an Indian tribe, an indigenous tribe in in that scene. And what I learned through research is that some of the tribes had permanent settlements, and some tribes had mobile settlements and moved from spot to spot. And I had it wrong in the book until I did more research and learned that the tribe that I was dealing with was a mobile tribe rather than a sedentary tribe. So there are a lot of things like that that I learned. Does that kind of answer what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. I find that fascinating.
I do
And
too.
it is those kind of details that I think the reader feels like they're in the hands of a master, because if they are knowledgeable about that period and you get it wrong, of course you're going to get a lot of very nice emails. So it's fantastic that you did that background research.
Well, I also had experts, and I have to thank them. Experts check what I did too. I mean, I had a number of Native Americans read it. There's one of the characters is from France, so I use French phrases. So I had French speakers read it to make sure I got that right. I had some Brits read it to make sure that I got the Brit language right. So I did my research, and then I had other people confirm it, because I agree with what you say. And that is, if I didn't get the small things right, then the big things could crumble. And I wanted people to believe this could have happened.
Well, based on some of the characters that you've already mentioned, I think I might know a couple of your answers here. But I want to ask you, Rick, who are some of your favorite authors? And were any of them influential when it came to crafting your own writing style?
Well, certainly Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, without a doubt. I mean, I started with the Hardy Boys. I mean, I've been a mystery reader my whole life. Um, but I mean, I love everybody from Dashiell Hammett to Robert Parker to, I like Clive Cussler. I realize he's kind of more of a thriller than a mystery writer, but Dirk Pitt is still solves mysteries. So I have a wide range. I like Father Brown mysteries. I like Magritte mysteries, Simenon. I mean, I would say that I was just influenced by every mystery writer that I read over my whole life. Perry Mason, Nero Wolfe. I mean, they all, excuse me, they all played into me and what I ended up with as a finished product.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear the history and background of all the different authors. Now, speaking of backgrounds, you've had a really varied and distinguished one. I mean, a musician, record producer, running a record company, working as a publishing company executive, now becoming an author. I'd love to ask you, what is the moment that stands out as your proudest of your career?
The proudest of my, actually, I hope it hasn't occurred yet. Uh, let's start there. I mean, I'm hoping that it goes somewhere else. Um, Proudest. I would have to say, I'm sorry, there is no one proudest moment. I mean, I was extremely proud when an album that I produced with co-produced with Steve Allen and Jane Meadows got a Grammy nomination. I was extremely proud when a single I produced in the disco era went to #1 on the disco charts, sold 500,000, and became a Coke commercial. I've enjoyed my life. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's just there've been a number of highlights, and I'm proud of all of them. I think what I'm most proud of, though, in my life is probably my children and my family. Um, but that's a different kind of an achievement.
It's a good answer, though. It's a
Very
good
well.
answer. I totally agree with you. Aside from music, Rick, over the course of your career, you've written, you said, as a journalist and a magazine and newspaper columnist. How then is writing fiction different? And do you find one easier than the other?
Okay. Um, I find writing mysteries the hardest thing I've written. I don't necessarily find fiction the hardest, but I find mystery the hardest uh, because you have to, you have to, let me just phrase this correctly. What you have to do is give the reader enough clues so that at the end they don't go, well, how was I supposed to know that? But at the same time, you're not giving them so many clues that they've figured it out when you didn't want them to figure it out. So you've got to keep going back and putting in more red herrings and more this and more that. Whereas when I, wrote the magical realism thing, it was just like a start to finish story. Things happened and things happened after that, and they happened after that. The nonfiction that I write is, to me, the easiest because I'm not drawing on what's playing in my mind as much as I'm drawing on what's already happened, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's so much easier to tell rather than to show, and dramatize. I have a background as a medical writer, and so I had a very similar experience where I had to really make sure my fiction didn't sound like, you were reading a drugstore, thing, a journalistic tone. So
Yeah.
fantastic. And speaking of writing, I feel that writing relies heavily on rhythm and cadence. Do you think that your musical background helped you kind of become a talented writer?
I don't honestly know. I mean, I've written many, many, many songs in my life, a number of which have been recorded. But I don't know. I would have to say that different people have talents and affinities for different things. For example, I have no small motor coordination. I built my son's a treehouse, and with the first hammer hit, I split my nail on my thumb instead of hitting the nail. Uh, I can't do that, but I tend to have a talent towards certain kinds of creativity. And some I'm better at than others, but I just find that I have a penchant toward writing, whether it be songs or books or articles or whatever. It's something I do uh, fairly well.
Mhm. And what makes for a good song, Rick? Because Ryan and I are, completely new to songwriting. I'm
Right?
really intrigued by that.
You know what? Different people will tell you different things. Um, because to me, it's been as much about the recording as the song. I mean, I can listen to a song, and I have over my whole career had a pretty good, not like Clive Davis, who to me has what they call golden ears, but I've got decent ears where I could say, that's just never going to come a hit, or well, that sounds like a hit song to me. I've been wrong. I've been wrong a lot, but I've been right more than I've been wrong. Um, but I always felt that what made for a good song was something that people would remember. That to me, first and foremost, it has to have a melody, a hook, a lyric, something where after you hear it, you remember part of it and you want to hear it again. Some people say, well, it's going to be this structure or that chordality, or I look at it more as the consumer. Did I want to hear this? Did I enjoy hearing it? Do I want to hear it again? And that to me is what makes a good song.
Mhm.
It's
Well,
fascinating. I want to come back and follow up on my last question with you, where
sure.
you talk about writing mysteries is the hardest thing you've ever done. So, what is your writing process like? You mentioned having to go back, and I think that's always the conundrum writers face is a good twist, good endings is something that you never see coming. But yet, when you do know it, you look back and it's kind of the only thing that ever made sense. You just never saw it, right?
Right.
So what is your writing process like? Do you outline a lot? Do you go back and rewrite? Just take us through that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I don't outline at all. Actually, what I do is uh, I don't know how else to describe it, but story ideas just pop into my mind. I mean, they're just there. And when when they pop into my mind, I jot them down on a piece of paper just so I remember what the general storyline is. And then when I hone in on one, like Scorpion, and I go, okay, it just plays in my head. It plays in my head like a movie. And my job is to transcribe it and describe to the reader what I'm seeing playing out in my head. And then what I do is after I do that first pass, Then I'll go back and I'll reread it. Although I must say, I reread on a regular basis. I could write 2 chapters. I'll reread the 2 chapters before I'll go to the third. I'm always editing as I'm going, but it's always based on what's playing in my head. And then when I'm done, I go back and I start putting in things because I'm making notes all along the way. I'm not outlining, but I'm notating. And so I'm just making notes about, well, we need to have a knife there, or there needs to be another suspect, potential suspect there. There aren't enough, and I'll incorporate them. Then it goes to my agents. Then it goes to the editor, and then it becomes what it becomes.
That's an incredible process. I love that. I'm completely also organic, and I think you just have to trust your process. No one does it right. Now you might have noticed that we have a missing person on the screen, and that is because Ryan just texted me, and all his power in his house went out, and so
Oh,
complete blackout. So um,
sorry.
no, I know it's exciting. Well, it's a mystery, and we're gonna have to solve it, and we're gonna have to ask, your Mr. Scorpion if he can help out. But why don't we just keep plunging on, and hopefully he'll
Sure.
be able to jump back in. But yeah, poor guy. He's like,
Yeah.
um, so okay, in your role as publisher, Rick, because that's a different hat, literally. I love it. What trends are you seeing in the industry? And do you think authors should look and consider the market, or do you think they should follow their heart, or some combination thereof?
Um, wow. Certainly there are some trends in the industry, but I'm not necessarily knowledgeable of or involved in all of them. The majority of the work that I'm doing in publishing now is doing acquisitions of best-selling authors who are looking for a newer, younger, more assertive, aggressive publisher than who they may have been with. I'm acquiring major catalogs like the Clavel catalog. I'm doing TV film work, and I'm doing some kind of non-traditional stuff. I just did a major deal with Weird Tales magazine, and we're going to be doing a whole imprint of Weird Tales books and novels. So I'm really not doing day-to-day acquisitions that much. But I've been all over the place. I mean, I have acquired military novels, I've acquired women's fiction, I've acquired cozy mysteries, I've acquired thrillers, I've acquired horror, I've acquired LGBTQ plus. I mean, it's. I think one of the nice things about today is that everything is kind of acceptable. Yeah, some of the genres like mystery and thriller and sci-fi are just always leaders of the pack, if you will. But it's so wide open, and especially with self-publishing now, there's so many more categories that are acceptable to readers and that they find, like, and read. That I think it's a wonderful time in the history of publishing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love that we're seeing fresh new ideas, like certain bestsellers, things we've just never really heard before. Like, I don't know if you've read Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby, but I thought that was a fantastic book, fresh voice, really interesting, and I felt really immersed in that.
I haven't read it, but I'm certainly familiar, aware of it.
Yeah,
But no, I haven't read it yet.
highly recommend it. It's great.
Okay,
Um,
sure.
yeah, and so just as we're before we wrap up, Rick, your first book is set to come out in February.
Right.
What- You mentioned a second book. So what's next? Is a long time series planned, or do you think you'd like to explore a standalone?
Okay. Well, actually, the second book that I'm got coming out is a short story collection that I'm in called Hotel California, and I am in very good company. I'm in Andrew Child, who took over for Lee Child, took over Reacher. He has contributed a brand new Reacher story to the anthology. Heather Graham's in there, John Gilstrap, many authors. I'm the low man on the totem pole, but I'm very happy to be the low man on the totem pole, if you will.
Yeah.
That's coming out in May. And then the Scorpion Book 2, which literally at this point is titled Pignon, Scorpion and the Barbershop Detectives Book 2, is going to probably come out a year from now, a year from February. And the thought is to have this be a series. And I did have a multi-book commitment from Blackstone. And so, yeah, I'm assuming and hoping that people will like the characters and want to keep reading their exploits.
And when I was taking a look, there seems to be a love interest coming into the story as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. The local female bookshop owner, Thelma Smith, I characterize as a brilliant, beautiful woman who is unconventional and ahead of her time. She's one of the leaders in the suffragette movement. That's another thing I researched, was the suffragette movement of the era there. And she and Scorpion find that they're kind of a match for each other, and it develops from there.
Mhm. It sounds fantastic. I mean, I love the fact that you came up with such a fresh idea and the mix of cultures. It sounds like very rich, enjoyable, cozy, and I have a feeling it's going to take off really well, and we're happy to support you in that trajectory.
I appreciate it, and all I can say is from your lips to God's ears.
It's gonna happen. Like, Ryan's off promoting it right now.
And believe me, I appreciate this interview and any and all help that you could give me, because it's a jungle out there getting people to recognize one book out of the millions that are published. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Are you kidding? We're honored to have you on, Rick. So thanks so much for joining us. Ryan, I apologize that you couldn't have joined us for the last few minutes, but given that your house is in a blackout, we fully understand. It sounds like the great start of a mystery.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope you like it.
I can't wait.